Hey everyone, welcome to another Power Monkey podcast. On today's episode, Chad and I interview Dr. Andy Galpin. Andy is a tenured professor at the Center of Sport Performance at Cal State Fullerton. He has a PhD in human bioenergetics, and he works a lot with a lot of Olympic weightlifters around the country, some of the top in the country, trying to get them to optimize their training, as well as it's pretty prevalent working with the MMA world. So he works a lot with fighters and trying to optimize their training from a variety of different kind of avenues. He's a wealth of knowledge. Andy, you really can't pinpoint exactly where his area of expertise is because he has such a breadth of knowledge. We go into some really interesting concepts around training, around breathing techniques, around muscle fibers, around what it looks like to be an optimal athlete and how to really kind of get to that point. I wish we had a little bit more time with Andy because I think we could have delved into some more concepts here, but this was a great starting point, and I hope you guys get a lot out of it. Andy, well, thank you so much for taking the time to jump on this podcast with Chad and I. I really appreciate you taking the time, man. I know you're probably a busy guy.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. It's good to connect with you two as well, so I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I think an important place to start is just kind of your background. Been listening to a lot of your stuff online and your social media posts, and you're pretty prolific when it comes to putting out content. But it seems like you have quite a few different jobs. I think, you'd say your education is in exercise physiology and things like that, but you span a pretty wide range of different expertise. Can you let our listeners know kind of what you do on a regular basis, where you're based, and kind of how that fits into the fitness world?
Did you just take a subliminal shot about me not knowing actually anything well? Is that what you just did?
Not quite. No, it's just a man of many talents. A man of many talents.
Well, they have a saying about that. Anyway, sure. I mean, I got I have an undergraduate degree in exercise science, a master's in human movement, and a PhD in human bioenergetics. So I'm a full-time professor at Cal State Fullerton down here in Southern California. I direct what's called the Center for Sport Performance. So we have a whole bunch of research laboratories, and we study anything that could possibly enhance human performance. So I guess you can think about my professional career in three lanes. Lane one would be, that research. And as I mentioned, we don't study disease or obesity or anything like that. It's all human performance based. And my specific niche is muscle physiology. So we study everything from what we'll call the whole muscle. So jumping, squatting strength, physical performance stuff, down to the single cell or gene level if required. So we take muscle samples from folks and kind of study it up and down that entire chain, depending on the question. Then outside of that, I teach at the senior and graduate level, exercise physiology, program design, sports nutrition, things like that. And then I also work with professional athletes. So, a few lifters, powerlifters, weightlifters, but mostly combat sport athletes. So UFC fighters and boxers and wrestlers and Olympians and things like that. So I'm a little bit all over the map, as you suggested. I don't have a real niche in terms of research, but that's by intent. So it's kind of what I do in the daily.
And were you an athlete yourself? Did you compete at a high level at anything, and that maybe sparked your interest in wanting to actually pass this information from a scientific side to the sporting world?
Well, that depends on what you consider high level. So high level from, compared to a multiple time Olympian, no. Somebody in the room, some folks in the room make other folks in the room look not as high level. No, I played every sport growing up in high school as well. I played college football. And then, of course, I competed in weightlifting. Probably, honestly, I would have to double check, but perhaps in some of the same meets as you were, Chad, although we may have missed each other, but certainly nowhere near your level. So it just depends on what you consider high level or not.
Yeah, well, Andy, that sparks my curiosity, of course. What years were what competitions?
So probably the years would be 2000. I'm terrible at this. 2004 to 2006 area. So mostly all the Arnolds back then. Mm-hmm. A couple of national championships, American Opens, things like that. And I was usually 77 or 69. So we'd have to double check, but maybe cross paths, pretty close.
Oh yeah, I'm sure we did. 77 was my stomping ground through those years for sure. I think in 2005 I was an 85 kilo lifter just for that 1 year. So I was known as Fat Chad back then. So you might not have saw me, in the back room warming up alongside of you. But
no, because I'm sure we weren't in the same flights. There was different categories there. No, I remember watching you compete for sure. I just don't know if we ever competed in the same meets because, back then it was so weird when they would do national championships and then they were trying to figure out when they're going to do the Arnold versus not be big meets. Mm-hmm. And so it was just everything was always all over the place. So you could never tell when looks like you were actually going to be competing. And in fact, I would always hope that you weren't going to be there. It's just one spot up I get to go.
Well, the Arnold was the biggest competition back then. I mean, and even that compared to really even a local competition these days was relatively small. I mean, you're talking about, even though it was the biggest one, we only had 2 sessions per weight class probably, or 2 flights per weight class. And now there's, at any national meet, there's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, and on different heats there, as you mentioned. So no, that's really cool. I'm always excited to hear that, someone has a background in, not just weightlifting. Yes, weightlifting, of course, weightlifting, but in any sport, on a national level or even training on a regular basis, trying to reach their highest potential, and bringing that into something that you do. So it's always refreshing to hear that.
Can we actually talk about Fat Chad for a little longer? That's where
hey, let's do it. I'm sure Andy has a lot to say about that. I mean, we could dig into that for sure. What I did to gain the weight, which was probably a little ridiculous and unnecessary, I can see at this time. But the fact that I was, whenever I don't want to say cut back down, but whenever I actually started eating what my body normally wanted to and made it back down to 77 pretty easily, I actually ended up being, stronger as a 77 than I ever was. So there's some interesting stuff there for sure.
Was that all just trying to, placement stuff for teams and all that? Is that why you went up, or was it?
It was just, I think the biggest thing was curiosity. I mean, I had done 185 kilogram clean and jerk as a 77, and I wanted to break the American record. It was a big goal of mine. And I tried it probably at least 10 different times in competition. And so after 2004, I decided to just play around and try to go up a weight class because a big goal for me there was a 200 kilo clean and jerk. So I chased that for about a year. I ended up doing 195, never quite made it to the 200, but ultimately I felt like I gave up on that 190 or that breaking the American record, which at the time was 187 and a half kilos. And I just felt like I gave up on it. So I had to go back.
Who had that record at the time? Do you remember?
Yeah. Oscar Chaplin. So I finally, when I came back down, took me 2 years, being in the 77 class again to finally get that 190. So it was a goal reached, an exciting time for sure.
Well, anytime you move past Oscar, that's a big thing. So.
Oh, absolutely. And unfortunately, not enough people, because there's so many more people in the fitness community and that know about weightlifting now. And I tell people all the time, and it's unfortunate that, most of you don't know who Oscar Chaplin is, or Shane Hammond, or Tara Knott, or Robin Bird, all those individuals that were a little behind this fitness craze.
Yeah, they missed it by 5 to 10 years.
For sure.
Could have been making a lot more money than they were making just 5 years later.
Definitely. Well, I wouldn't say that. I still wouldn't say there's a lot of money in weightlifting, Andy. I'm not sure, but yeah, no, definitely more notoriety and, especially the way things are going now with drug testing. And I don't think everything will be completely clean, but there sure are a lot of athletes getting their medals taken away and that kind of thing. So it's interesting to me too, to watch where a few of those athletes are continuing to get higher placements awarded to them.
Indeed. It's good for the sport, though. It's been fun to see, back then we would have to look for 4 months to find a meet, and then we'd have to drive 9 states over to do it. And now it's just pick a weekend, pick wherever you want, especially down here in Southern California. I started a weightlifting club here at Cal State Fullerton 8 years ago. And we, at the time, our second or third year, we had hosted several of the biggest non-national meets in USA weightlifting history. We were putting 150, 200 people, through these local meets. And now these kids are so damn spoiled. You know, it's just like, oh, well, I don't do this week. I want to do next week. And I'm like, you don't even understand. Like,
Right.
we'd have to drive to Alabama. We'd have to drive just all over to just find a meet once a semester.
Oh,
Kids
man.
these days.
You know, hockey
Yeah,
bastards.
I mean, we can certainly get off the weightlifting topic here in a minute, but it just brings back so many memories of going to local, like you said, having a hard time finding local competitions. And I remember going to, you know, most of the local competitions I went to, there were like 8 of us signed up, and the other 7 were the only people watching you. You know, maybe someone's mom and dad were there, but you know, certainly there wasn't any more than about 15 people ever watching those things with 8 to 10 participants. So it's certainly a different time in a different world.
My favorite was, you know, you drive. It's because back in the time too, I'm in college, so there's just no resources, etc. And so, you know, you go together and you get 5 people and you get in a hotel room and you split gas and you go, you know, 4 states over, and then you show up and you probably cut weight, or at least you've been on a pretty tight diet for some amount of time. And then you show up and there's nobody else in your weight class. So like, there's nobody else the one before. And it's like, all right, everyone's 94 right now. Like, what? Fantastic. Right. Like all that. And, or it's like, I remember one time we went to Chattanooga and we did a meet, and it was me and a couple other buddies. I think we were all 77 or something. We show up and the only other people in the 77 kilo were like 14-year-olds. We're like, great. And so we all chose to go up. And I was like, wow. Right. Like, I don't want to take, because they're giving out, you know, ribbons or medals or whatever. I'm like, I really, let's let the 14-year-old have the first place trophy. Like, I really don't need it.
For sure.
So.
Well, hey, let's go ahead and take this weightlifting thing a little bit further. Then, I mean, you know, Dave, if you want to hang up, we're probably not going to talk about gymnastics today. It sounds like Andy's not a fan of that at all. But you know, and this is, I want to ask it from the perspective of weightlifting, because you did spend so much time training in it and doing some competing, but also just athletes in general. If we can kind of relate those and bring those two things together, and what is it that weightlifters do you think are most commonly missing in their training from your background in weightlifting, your experiences in weightlifting, but also what you've learned through the years in school and being a professional?
Okay, I actually have a very specific answer for this, because I do this a lot. Because of where I come from, my background in the physiology piece, as well as with the combat sport athletes, one thing weightlifters are just not particularly talented at and or educated in is the weight cut process. And so, I mean, I'm dealing with, you know, I've been working with Morgan for, you know, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years now, and going through her stuff, and then some other pretty high level weightlifters that are still competing. But a lot of them they really miss the boat on what to do, how to do it. They freak out over things that are, you know, like, oh, they're a week out and they're a kilo heavy. I'm like, you're not even, like, you're not even, what are you doing? Or they do really silly things, and then you see them tanking and missing weight, and they're halfway across the world for world championships or Pan Ams, and they don't make it, or they just bomb. So that aspect is something that we've worked hard with. And it really changed, you know, Morgan's life a lot. It really helped in many pieces. She was able to go out and compete a whole bunch of times and never have to worry about making 49, and actually able to train a little bit heavier. So that is one piece that it needs to come to the sport with a little bit more, I'll say, science behind it. So you see a lot of folks that go out there and they make weight for 3 meets, and they want to sell an ebook on weight cut for
right.
And I'm like, you don't have an education in this field. You made it.
Yeah.
But this is not who we should be getting our information from. There's a whole, you know, bolus of scientists that do this and have done this for decades. We've read studies on it. So that part is where I'd say it could be improved.
Well, and you're just to confirm to the listeners, you're talking about Morgan King, who was initially a CrossFitter. She came into weightlifting kind of out of nowhere. She exploded on the scene, ended up making the 2016 Olympic team, and she's still, you know, high level and pushing to be the best that she can. So certainly one of those athletes that is, you know, cutting down for a weight class very often. And, you know, I may be one of those individuals that you explained that probably has no business putting out information and telling people how to do it. But I feel like I found a process that worked well for me. And I did notice, like you said, again, maybe I wasn't doing it as optimally as I could have been either, but I did notice a lot of things that people were doing and that they were concerned about that really made no sense to me. And my athletes even, you know, that I work with and try to talk them through the process, or at least give them some recommendations on what might be a little bit better. Like you said, they are just completely worried about, like you said, half kilo or 1 kilo over, and we're 2 or 3 weeks out. I'm like,
oh, geez,
come on. I mean, first of all, you need to keep as normal of a body weight on as long as you possibly can, unless you're just, above and you're 5 kilos over or something. Then maybe you need to, there's that line there to where you say, okay, you can train here safely, be healthy, recover better, and everything else, but you're not so far over that you can't get down safely. And then there's, if you go over that line, depending on what the body weight is, maybe that's 3, 4, 5 kilos, definitely 5 kilos, you probably should go up a weight class. And I think, there's way too many young athletes in our sport, youth, junior athletes that are probably wasting a lot of time in their health and trying to stay light for too long. Would you agree with that, Andy?
Yeah, absolutely. There's really separate parts to talk about. It's the weight loss in the 4 to 5 weeks prior to the competition, or is it that last couple of days or last couple of hours? And
right.
I've dealt with this criticism a lot. Again, I want to make sure I'm clear. I'm not a fan of people cutting huge amounts of weight. I want you to be as close to your training weight as you can as your competing weight. That's the ideal scenario, right? So
right.
if you're at the 70 kilos and if you're training at 77, there's no way you're going to perform.
Yeah,
it's not what we're advising at all. I'm not pushing people towards doing it. What I'm simply saying is, if you have to do it, let's do it in a better way, so you can perform better. So, because I talk about this so much, people say that all the time. Like, oh, he's such an advocate for weight cut. No, I'm the opposite. I would love for you to be 71 kilos and compete at 70. That would be fantastic. But it's just not always the reality because of, a whole host of things. They change weight classes, pretty routinely. That just happens. So now people are making decisions, and when you're trying to make these world team or Pan Am teams, like what happened with Jordan, Jordan De La Cruz, and it's like she was at 55 for forever, and then realized that, hey, actually I can get to 49 probably pretty easy, and then all of a sudden probably make the Olympics, where if she stayed up a weight class, her chances were still good but a little bit lower. That was a no-brainer for her, right? So she came down with really good success, and she has no problem making that adjustment. So there's a lot of reasons that are good why folks would do it, but it's when you mentioned the youth there. I'm a fan of virtually no weight cutting in those individuals. Unless you're talking again, like you think you got a chance to break a youth world record or something like that, and you're 15. But when you're 11, 12, 13, like, just go compete.
Right.
Just go out and do the stuff, and a kilo or something like that, fine. If we can do that, and if you're 105 kilos, and okay, we can pull a kilo off you pretty quick. But any of those smaller weight classes, I don't advocate for it at all. The least amount humanly possible, really.
Yeah, I did notice some stuff on your Instagram, and I don't even remember how long ago this was, but in one instance there was correct me if I'm wrong, a female fighter potentially cutting some weight, and she had some issues and had to go to the hospital, and you were a part of that. And so, obviously you were public about it, you were open about it. How difficult of a decision was that for you to come out and put that information out? Because it sounded like it helped a lot of people.
Yeah, not difficult at all. Not even remotely difficult to put it out, because, that was a tough situation. This is a professional athlete. She's in $1 million tournament. So we're not talking about winning California state championships.
Right.
She's already a multiple-time world champion in her sport. So, she's not a kid. And then when you consider the risks of what she does professionally, this is inherent in it. So, she just, for a whole host of reasons that for her personal reasons I won't get into, it just was clear to me several hours out that we weren't going to get anywhere near this. And we have 36 hours usually from weigh-in to fight. And it's a whole different ballgame than weighing in 2 hours before and then lifting.
Right.
So it's an entirely different universe. I'd been with her. I'd handled her stuff for a couple of fights before, so I knew her pretty well. And I was there with her the whole time. And it was actually clear 12 hours or more out that it just wasn't going to make the weight. And so she wanted to continue to try. So I said, okay, but if I see X, X, and X, I'm pulling the plug immediately. And those things happen. So I just pull the plug for reasons. And then, I never put anyone's public information or any athlete's information out there, but this is a situation where she was like, hey, can you just let everybody know? what happened, on your platform. So I said, sure. And so I put it out there, and also because that's what she pays me for. That's my job. There's no other way to approach that other than saying that this is 100% my fault, not hers. Because she did. She listened to everything I said. She did exactly the plan for months out. It didn't happen. So there was no problem. I said, you want me to put it out there? I'll put it out there. No question. Easy decision. And then, of course, coming with that, it again comes with taking full responsibility for the missed opportunity on her end. So, yeah, it's an easy decision. You can't be at this level, in my opinion, with whatever we do, and you can't have the glory without taking the punches either. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to work with high-level folks and you're going to take the credit for when they succeed, you got to take the punch when it doesn't work. And that's the only time an athlete I've ever worked with has ever missed weight. But that's part of it. So I would have never put it out. I mean, a lot of people were actually critical. They're like, why would you do this? I'm like, I didn't want to do this, but she wanted me to let people know. So of course I put it out there. I certainly wouldn't use that to be like, oh, this is going to get a bunch of likes or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's look at any of the stuff I do. It's not my ethos at all. But that's what that situation. So it was unfortunate, but it was good in retrospect there's some good to come of it. Anyways.
Sure.
Andy, I wanted to kind of touch on something that I don't know how much you know about Power Monkey in general and kind of who we are as an organization and kind of what we believe in and the events that we kind of host. And one of the things that we really strive to do is, we're a group of former elite athletes that have transitioned to coaching and trying to help people become better in our specific fields. Weightlifting and gymnastics is kind of where it started out, but we've jumped into a lot of different areas. And what we really try to do is try to combine our technical backgrounds with as much of the scientific advantages that people are using, the studies that you're doing and the people in your fields are doing, to be able to provide the next generation of athletes with proper training methodologies and not to be caught into this world of let's just do the same thing that the previous generation did just because of the fact that they did it. It's very prevalent in gymnastics. It's very prevalent in weightlifting. And in a lot of cases, it can cause more damage to the athlete, especially younger athletes, than the benefit that they're trying to get out of it. And so we're trying really hard to kind of make sure science and what's being put out as being appropriate right now is part of the training methodology. And it seems to be the way that you approach things too. And you've collected experts in a lot of different areas to be able to say, okay, I know I'm not an expert here, but here's someone that can really help you in this particular area. Have you found that to be kind of a guiding light for you in terms of how you approach training these athletes? And kind of like, did your background kind of lead you into that path, or was it kind of the reverse? Did you notice that it was needed and then you started to kind of apply it? I'm just kind of curious how you've kind of applied that same mentality in the way that you work with athletes.
Yeah, I have a bit of a unique perspective here because you're not going to find too many folks that are the full-time actual practicing, running research laboratories like I am, that actually work with athletes as well. And I would actually say that I identify more with the latter, not the former. So like I don't, if I hear myself say, oh, I'm a scientist, I'm like, well, that's weird. Like I've been running these labs for a decade, but I still, that's not the natural. I am more inclined to the other part. I still think myself as a 23-year-old college football player.
Right.
I'm still stuck there mentally. And ask my wife, she'd probably say same. I'm 14 probably to her.
Hey, it's not a bad place to be. Not a bad place to be.
So, coming into it, and the whole reason I got into science and the way I approach it is because of exactly what you mentioned, Dave, is, I always came into science thinking, I don't know about this, with skepticism, you'll say, right? And I was always coming at it from the practitioner's perspective. So like, wow, does this one study then translate into we should train this way? Or would that apply to a weightlifter, right? Because back then there was really no research on weightlifting. Would that apply to a powerlifter? And I'm sure gymnastics is the same. I'm not aware of hardly any performance-based research on gymnastics.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, so 10 years ago, there's probably just a dearth, right? Mm-hmm. So that was always the approach, and that was my eye coming in. So then, of course, developing my coaching philosophy and approach would replicate that. And then the same thing with my scientific approach of coming in and saying, okay, let's have humility in how we interpret research, and let's not overinterpret it. Let's take it for what it is and be able to handle it. Then we have to then take that research, whatever it's getting, and apply it within the context of the athlete that we're trying to use it for, and recognizing that it may or may not be the same thing. There are major limitations with research and major limitations with science up and down. In fact, I have an hour-long video on my YouTube page where I kind of walk you through how to do this and examples if you ever want to like super learn how to do what I call bullshit detection on stuff. But it's really how to interpret or not overinterpret or not underinterpret research for the practitioner. So I would say that part of me is what drove me both as a practitioner as well as a scientist. And so my approach to handling new research and how I guide my athletes is that exact same thing. And I tell any individual that I work with, and I tell my students, and I tell my graduate students all the same thing, is I will never guarantee you a result. I will never guarantee you that I'm right. Things change too often. I'm certainly not that smart, of course. So there's always a bit of humility in saying, I think this is going to work based on my years of experience, based on what other folks that have done this have said, based on what the science is saying. But there's no guarantee, because the science could end up being wrong for a whole host of good or bad reasons. Just because someone else found it to work, that doesn't mean it's going to work with you, because physiology is too unique. So that's always how I handle it, is saying, okay, well, when new evidence comes out, wherever that evidence comes from, so it comes from an athlete, comes from a different coach is having success, whether it comes from science, there are inherent benefits and limitations to all of those types of evidence. And so I will use them, but I also won't give too much faith to any one avenue or any one piece of information. And so that doesn't mean you don't act. You still have to. You have to make decisions, and you have to put your coaches in the best, or your athletes in the best position possible to succeed. But you can't ever guarantee them, and that is the absolute right way to go about it. And I never do that. So that's how I handle it.
Yeah, I love that approach. I think it's so important for athletes to understand that, especially our sport specifically, and this changing of guard that we're seeing with the coaching style, and helping people understand that there potentially could be a better way. And when I mean by better way, it's one that involves longevity, and not just peaking as an athlete when you're 15 or 16 years old in the women's gymnastics world, or getting to the Olympic Games, and then your career, your ability from an athletic standpoint just falling off a cliff once your competitive career is over. But what does my career look like 40 years down the road? Can I move? Can I do things? Can I have a quality of life that is not just on the same level as someone my age, but maybe better? So I think those approaches are so important.
Yeah, well, actually, on that similar note, I pitch it a little bit different to the professional athletes I work with. The same idea, but I also say, what if I can buy you one more year of your career?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So right now you're a professional fighter. Where do you make more of your money, at the beginning or at the end of your career? Way more. You'll make more in one fight at the end of your career than you did your first 10 fights combined.
Sure.
So if I can buy you one more year, 2 more fights, or I can get you 2 more years in Major League Baseball, that could be $50 more million.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's what we have to think about, is not optimizing you at 26, 27, 28, or whatever the thing is. But can we get it so that you can finish your career and you can have now the choice to say, yeah, I want one more fight, or I want to throw one more year, or I want to lace up the cleats one more year, or I don't want to. But it's not going to be because you're broken and completely smashed, and that option is taken away from you. So when you put it in the context of money for the professional athletes, they tend to like that a lot, right? Like,
that's powerful, sure. Yeah, that's powerful. Are you?
Yeah, of course, don't break your kids too. Yeah, whatever.
That's part of it. Are you able to dictate the studies that you put forward at Cal State Fullerton, or are you kind of, does the university have a say in that? Does the donors and where the research grants come from, are you able to kind of dictate where the studies are done?
100% controlled under me.
That's amazing.
Yeah, there's no, I have no pressure from the university whatsoever, and I do not take funding from folks that give direction like that.
Wow, that's incredible. So, I mean, I'm sure you seem to be a special case. I mean, how many other exercise physiologists out there work as closely as you do with athletes, are able to kind of pull information from their daily, training habits and say, okay, let's take a closer look into this? And does that happen often, where you're seeing things in real life on the athletic world and then saying, let's see if we can delve into this a little bit more and find out some more information on it?
There are some, and what I can actually say as a positive light is it's growing. For actually some financial reasons that you wouldn't think to make sense, but it actually behooves, and this is actually ridiculous that I'm going to say this, but it behooves the athletic department and the kinesiology or sports science departments to work together, which is like the biggest slap in the face ever. Like, why hasn't that actually been the process the entire damn time?
Right.
It hasn't. And so there are actually places that are hiring, for example, like athletic directors who will co-run both areas, or they'll hire a sports scientist who be work for the athletic department, if you will, has a position maybe as a professor in kinesiology, but also works directly for the sports or for the athletic departments. And there's a whole bunch of these things slowly growing. I mean, you have other folks like, Sean Arndt, who's at Rutgers for forever, and his whole entire laboratory, I think he trained the women's soccer team. He was a strength and conditioning coach for him full time, and all of his research was on the Division I soccer players. So folks in Texas have done it before. And there's a handful of us that are working with the college athletes. In terms of working with professional athletes, I mean, you have some that'll do like consulting outside, but they won't really use it much out there. And are some folks that do that, but it's not common. I will say though that in our field of exercise physiology, if you will, it's a lot less dictated by grant money in terms of research than you think. It's actually very rare that someone in sports science would be pushed in a direction because of a grant money, because we don't get national grant money anyways. I'm not getting National Institute of Health money. I'm not getting NSF money. So typically research in our field is supported by exercise equipment companies, supported by supplement companies. That's the biggest place that we go, or things like the NSCA, who provides research grants. And those folks don't dictate at all what you do. For the most part, you have a lot of latitude. So our field is pure-ish. Now, if you want to go to like pharmacology, then look out. But with us, it's not that bad. The problem with us is they typically don't have access to the athletes, and they don't have any funding to do it. And so you're forced to kind of do, well, let's just do another study, but let's just do it on recreational lifters, aka college kids in kinesiology, because we don't have the funding, the time, etc. So that's really the limitation of our field, rather than it is being pushed by large funding agencies, if you will.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the science stuff, and I want to talk about muscle fibers a little bit, kind of your area of expertise. Can you first just give a little bit of a rundown on, very kind of an overview of, I'm sure it's a lot more intricate than we'll be able to do on podcasts here, but just a general overview of the different muscle fibers that are out there, and what they basically translate to into sport-specific training, kind of how they translate into becoming a better athlete in a specific type of sport.
So we'll handle the first part, and then we can come back and I'll let you re-ask the second one if you like.
Okay.
Because that second piece can be very long.
Okay.
But I'll make the first one short and you can go from there. So effectively, you can think of it as your muscle is made up of two different types of muscle fibers. So the muscle itself is actually comprised of millions of different individual muscle fibers or muscle cells. And we could broadly break those up into two categories, fast twitch and slow twitch. And they have those names because it represents their characteristics. In other words, a fast twitch fiber is able to twitch or contract at a greater speed. Slow twitch goes slower. The advantage of the slow twitch, however, is they have greater endurance, roughly. So you have fibers that are meant to give you endurance, and you have fibers that are meant to contract with high velocity. Now, actually, much like anything else, if you want to dive deeper, it gets far more complicated than that. But that's the overview. So in general, a fast twitch fiber, somebody like Chad probably has a whole host of them, where he probably has a lot less of these slow twitch fibers based on both his years of training in a specific fashion that requires a lot of force and speed. Are
you saying I'm lazy there, Andy? What's going on here?
I'm saying if we put you through Fran, you probably wouldn't have the most competitive time we've ever seen.
I would agree with that. I would agree.
Right. So you take somebody in the other end of the spectrum, right? They may have a great amount of endurance, but not the pure explosiveness. So that's the basic one. Now, the second part of your question, I'll let you ask again differently if you want based on that.
Well, okay. So going along that, so if you kind of consider it almost a bell curve where people fall in genetically into these categories of types of muscle fibers that they're born with, are most people kind of in the middle, kind of a good combination of fast twitch, slow twitch? Some people way off on the fast twitch side, some people way off on the slow twitch side, but for the most part, people kind of in the middle, kind of a solid combination of both?
Okay, so it actually depends on the actual muscle you're talking about. And so we would actually broadly group each individual muscle as being more likely to be one or the other or in between. So the example, what we call postural or anti-gravity muscles, your spinal erectors, your soleus. So if you go to your calf muscle, it's the one kind of closest to your ankle there. Those are almost entirely slow twitch. And so in humans, the soleus is usually like 80% slow twitch. Spinal erectors may be higher. They're not meant to explode, to contract very hard. They're meant to just keep you vertical. That's what we call them. Keep you erect all day, if you will. So postural muscles. You contrast that to, say, the gastrocnemius, which is that other one. So if you flex your ankle, and it's that thing that pops out inside of your ankle. That's almost the exact opposite. So it's usually like 80% fast twitch and 20% slow twitch, because it's meant to have, it's a vertical jump. It's an explosive ankle extension, but you can't do that all day, right? And so it goes down. So form is function in this world. So the type, and if you go through the muscles, biceps, hamstrings are very, very, very fast twitch. They're meant to explode and sprint, and they're not meant to sort of run all day. We use those differently. Each muscle has a separate function, and it follows with this fiber type. Where we can get into, I think, the interesting conversation is when you look at like the vastus lateralis. So the quad muscle on your leg, the one that's on the far outside. And this is one that is probably, 90+% or more of the research on fiber type comes from the vastus lateralis for a bunch of unimportant reasons, frankly. And so that muscle is a wide range of fiber type composition. So you could grossly say most people are, 50-50 fast twitch and slow twitch in the vastus lateralis. But as we've seen, in fact, our study from 2018 World Championships in weightlifting, those folks we biopsied, and it wasn't uncommon for us to see, that to be 70-75% fast twitch. We've done it in the opposite, endurance runners, marathoners, cross-country skiers, and they might be 70 or 80% slow twitch in that exact same muscle. And so you see a ton of heterogeneity, so a mixed combination across that entire spectrum. We've done this in monozygous twins. So these are, people that have the exact same DNA. They're clones of each other, quite literally, with different activity patterns and exercise patterns. And we see that they differ as largely as you can get. So in this one example, we had a monozygous twins that were in their 50s, and they were kind of the same. They played high school sports until they're about 18. And then the next 30 years, they went separate ways. So one was basically an endurance guy, cycled, swam, and had done 50 or 60 competitions in 30 years. The other one basically was a truck driver. And so the truck driver was, again, about 50-50 fast twitch, slow twitch, but the endurance twin was 95% slow twitch. Mm-hmm. So to answer kind of all these questions together, it depends on the muscle. It depends on the individual person. We are certainly, your genetics you inherit determine your starting position. But where you're actually at is determined heavily by your lifestyle. And so we know that your exercise habits or lack of habits, in other words, if you go into a cast for a couple of weeks, your fiber type will change. Inactivity, sedentary activity, we know that obesity, diabetes, your diet, nutrition, all of these things actually play a role in the fiber types that are actually going to be expressed in your muscle. So again, genetics will determine a little bit of it, but your lifestyle has a huge influence on what's actually going to be expressed into a muscle fiber.
That's incredibly interesting. So it seems like the adaptation that comes with training is even more important than the actual genetics from what you're seeing.
Well, so it's complicated because it depends on what we call exposure. So now, if let's say, how trained are both of you right now? Like, I know you're not your best, most physically trained ever, but would you consider both yourselves to be like, you're reasonably trained?
Say I'm COVID fit. Is that
Yeah. Yeah, three or 4 days a week of lifting, and usually a short Metcon after that. So yeah.
Okay, so you're reasonably trained. So if you guys, if Chad, you went from 3 or 4 days a week, and you went to 5 days a week,
right?
In a week, we wouldn't see any change, because the change from what you're actually asking your muscle to do now to what you're changed it and asked it to do then, it's not that much different, and it's not that much time. But if you went from 3 to 4 days a week, and you went to 5 days a week, after a year, we might see a change. Mm-hmm. Okay. Or the opposite. You go from 1 day a week to working out 5 days a week. Well, that's a huge change in exposure. So we may be able to pick up a change in fiber type after 4 or 5 weeks only. So it really depends on how much of a change. The opposite could be true as well. So if you're like, dude, this is the fittest I've ever been. I'm training 6 days a week, twice a day. and then all of a sudden you stopped working out, we would see a change in your fiber type really fast because the change, again, the gradient is very high. So it depends on those two combinations. How much of a change in the stimulus are you giving it, and how long do you give it to do that? So those are the two things that will really determine it. In terms of your lifestyle stuff, that will get it there. So, I mean, an example of this would be from our weightlifting study, and this is available. We made sure it was open access, so anyone can go click on it and read it. So we looked at the girls and guys that were on the world team, I think it was 2018 in weightlifting, and we compared those to a bunch of weightlifters who were on the national level. So these are folks that are qualifying and getting first, second, or third at national championships of weightlifting, but hadn't been able to make a world team yet. So still really pretty high level, strong girls and guys. And what we found actually is the ones that had the most amount of fast twitch fibers, it was categorically different. So the girls that are on the world or Olympic team had the most amount of fast twitch fibers. And it was actually more than the guys at the national level. And why that is important is because I can't then tell you that, say, these girls had more fast twitch fibers because the girls on the world and Olympic team also had about twice the training years and competition years. It was like 7 years plus or minus versus 3.5 or something. So I couldn't tell you based on our study design, well, it's because they trained twice as long, or maybe they made the world team, et cetera, because they were born with a little bit more fast twitch already. So I can't answer things like that specifically, and so I don't know which one, but it's clearly that both were playing a part, because when you compare the amount of fast twitch fibers in any of the groups that we biopsied, it was so much higher than a normal amount that you'd see, even in somebody who's pretty trained. So some, college age guy or girl who works out really hard 5 days a week, etc. In fact, the amount of fast twitch fibers we saw in these folks was the highest. The amount of what we call 2A, so a special type of fast twitch fibers, was the highest we've ever seen in the literature, period. So it was pretty extraordinary. Point being, we can't exactly tease out specifically genetics versus lifestyle. We know that both playing a very big component, but it's difficult to get down to that level of precision.
Yeah, so you are saying that somebody like Chad, who has a considerable amount of fast twitch because of his training up to this point in weightlifting, could possibly become a pretty solid CrossFitter if he puts in enough time.
So damn
Ooh, be careful. That's not a good question.
No, so, okay, I'll actually clarify that. I know you're jesting, but it's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Clearly, I don't know Chad's fiber type. I've never biopsied him. But clearly, most likely he was born with a lot more fast twitch fibers and other tactics and other skills and abilities that made him so successful in the sport, right? It's not just your fiber type. There's tons of other things, including non-physiological things, mentality, et cetera, right? Having said that, it's also probably likely that his training moved that further down the line. And so it was a combination. But remember, just like strength training gains, if newbie gains are real, right? And what happens to the rate of gains as you continue to train? The rate of gain slows down considerably, right? So you can put on 50 pounds on your squat the first year of training, but then you might, and again, Chad, you can really speak to this. It might take you 5 years to put on 5 more kilos.
Yeah.
If anything, right? So the rate of your ability to grow goes down because you get closer and closer to the highest level you can achieve. Well, the same thing would be true with your fiber type. So if Chad was already born, and once he fully matured at, say, 19 or whatever, he was already 75% fast twitch. Well, 5 years of training might move him from 75 to 78 because he's already so damn close to the line where, if I was born at 60%, I could have gone from 60 to 74% or something like that. So the rate of change goes down once you become more and more specified for what you're asking the muscle to do. Now, once he stopped training, it would fall down really quickly because it doesn't need to be that pushed to the limit. Just like, if you were to stop training for a month right after your highest squat ever, it would fall down fast. Right? You'd still be strong as hell after it would fall down quickly.
That makes sense. So bear with me with this. Go ahead, Chad. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I've got just so many follow-up questions, but I'll do one for now. And one, just so you know, Andy, I'm going to be coming to you because basically what I got out of that is you said you can make me an elite CrossFitter, so you'll be seeing me. But to go along with what you're talking about here, you
Remember
say,
that
so for
I said earlier
example,
about you also have to have mentality and you have to be mentally tough and all that.
sure. There you go.
That's
Well,
all you're.
so let's say that, I trained to say I was 75% or whatever. And is there any memory to that in my body? Like if I take off for a year, if I do nothing for a year, I'm going to be able to go back in the gym. I'm still going to be able to snatch pretty well and maybe even fairly heavy, maybe even at 80, 85%, maybe even 90%. If I wanted to be stupid, I could maybe do 90% of where I'm currently at in a snatch and still get under the bar really quickly. So you said that it's going to drop off pretty quickly, but is there any memory to where that high level of speed, that highest level of fast twitch is going to come back?
Yeah. So remember, you dropping off quickly because you're so high would still land you in a spot of excellent performance. That's the key to remember there, right? So you went from 77 or 78, where you'd fall off to 74 fast, but you wouldn't fall to 20.
Right.
So your ceiling, your floor is very high. So it would come back down to the floor quickly, but it wouldn't go very far down because you're probably genetically dispositioned to be already pretty damn high. So you probably wouldn't go much lower than that unless you truly took a year off. But having said that, yes, you would probably return at least back to that genetic starting place because you've inherited the genes to be very, very happy to program for those proteins to make those fiber types, right? Now, going the other direction for someone like Chad would be probably very difficult. So developing actually a tremendous amount of slow twitch fibers, initially you would probably gain some pretty quickly, but getting much past that would take you a long, long, long time because you inherently, your body doesn't want to be there. So your rate of gain there is probably a lot more difficult. Hence, probably going to struggle to ever be a very good CrossFitter.
That's what I was going to say. So that just told me that I will not be coming to you to be a CrossFitter. But it does make me curious about someone like Matt Fraser because he was a high level weightlifter. And so in the specific muscle that you were talking about, what would you, and I know you don't know, but what would your guess be in regards to what his percentage might be? Because he can still lift very well. He can still lift heavy and maybe even snatches and clean and jerks more than he ever has at this point, but he's also beating everyone else in everything else.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's actually a question I've been somewhat interested in for years now is what some of these elite CrossFitters really look like under the hood. Because it did challenge so many of our thoughts, especially 10 years ago with performance, right? And CrossFit was, for a bunch of things you could say, that's one thing that they did pretty clear, right? Is they made us question that and then they smashed that door down. It's just not even an argument anymore that holds water. So praises to them for that. My prediction would be that all those folks that are making it to the games are probably mostly fairly fast twitch individuals, and they find a way to endurance through other means. And so when we look at all things that go into human performance and exercise performance, we're zoomed in really finely now to the muscle cell itself. But we have to come back and say, okay, well, in order for a muscle to contract, a muscle has to actually pull on a bone. Well, in order to do that, there's connective tissue. Then there's a ligament. Okay, now pulling back from there, something has to tell the muscle to contract. And that's going to be the peripheral, so that the nervous system that's outside, not central to the body, right? It's outside connecting to the muscle. Then there's the central nervous system. Then you have the brain. And then backing yourself all the way back down from there, you have to be able to ventilate air in and out and get waste out, or get O2 in and get waste out. So you have an actual lung issue. You have a cardiovascular. So you have the vascularity, so your arteries and veins and capillaries. You have the actual heart. You have things that have to control pH in the blood. Then you actually have to be able to transport things in and out of the cell. So my point is, performance is not determined by one aspect. And so say, for example, you had a lot of fast twitch fibers, which allowed you to move quickly, but you had an excessively high lung capacity. Your breathing mechanics were exceptional. Your blood was able to buffer pH really, really, really well. The transporters to get nutrients in and waste out of the cell are loaded to the max. This would allow you to then have high levels of this type of endurance while also then being fast. The opposite probably wouldn't be the case. So if you had a bunch of slow twitch fibers, you narrowly have that endurance piece covered, but you can't fake speed. There's no other way to be fast than contract fast, and there's no real way to do that other than having some fast fibers. Now, these folks that are at the CrossFit Games aren't truly exceptional in terms of speed, But that's also not the demand. I mean, their entire sport is basically a maintenance of power or a maintenance of strength, right? It's a muscular endurance, anaerobic capacity for the most part, and then just don't die during the marathon on the rower thing,
Right.
But they're not putting up. We'll put it this way: folks like that are putting up pretty damn good numbers in terms of the snatch and clean and jerk that are comparable to. I mean, you've seen how many of them just literally walk off the CrossFit Games and then weeks later compete at national championships or higher, right?
Right.
But their numbers on the endurance stuff are nowhere close, right? So they're a lot closer to the elite level of strength than they are the true endurance stuff. So, I mean, none of these guys or girls would be even remotely close to a national championship in an 800 meter, or even past that, right? 10K, like stuff like that, or not even close to a true marathon. So I'm not like criticizing them at all. It's ridiculous what they do. It's so impressive, but it's just looking at it objectively, saying they're really, really close to the strength numbers. They're not nearly as close to the true endurance numbers generally. So they're probably physiologically really, really strong, and they get the endurance through the other mechanisms. That's my only point there. Mm-hmm. No criticism.
No, that seems to make sense, and I think it would be super interesting to be able to actually run a study on something like that. And to be honest with you, I think the athletes would probably be interested in partaking in something like that, just to be able to say, hey, how can I maximize what I have, and how can I kind of do better with what's actually inside this hood, right?
Yeah, no, we've I put it out to the universe for like 5 years now, but it's a funding issue. No one's interested in funding it.
Right. You brought it up, but I was wondering if we could just talk about breathing a little bit, breathing techniques, because it seems to be a hot topic right now, with books coming out, and we have Patrick McCown coming on the podcast next week, author of Oxygen Advantage, and I'm just kind of curious on your take. He mentions not enough exercise physiologists speaking a lot about the breathing side of things and getting your breath under control and the value that it can have. And I'm just curious on how much time you spend on working on breathing techniques with your athletes, and also anything you do on the studying side of it.
So actually, I would disagree with Patrick a little bit on this one. I don't think exercise physiologists should be speaking on it because they don't know anything about it.
Okay.
I'm actually glad they don't. This is an area we've spent a lot of time on. In fact, Patrick is an advisor for one of our, actually just happened to be randomly the hat I'm wearing, XPT.
Mm-hmm.
So we brought Patrick on to be an advisor for us a handful of years ago. So he's a great resource in this. I've been working with Brian McKenzie, and I have been doing stuff in this area for, 5 years or more. We actually published a couple of studies doing this, and we actually have another one, if I can stop doing podcasts, that we have finished, and I'm just got to write up and get out published. So I've done a pretty good amount in this side, and we use it with basically every athlete that I work with. In fact, I just this morning finished a breathing program up for one of my UFC fighters, Brian Ortega. So he has a pre-workout breathing routine. He has a post-workout. He has in between rounds in the cage workout, and then he has at home before bed stuff. So we work on both the mechanics as well as actually using the breath to simulate and to cause physiological adaptation. So yeah, I'm not nearly as versed in it as Brian, or especially Brian. Like, he's just really got this stuff down with a bunch of different ways. But it is an area I think it's a no-brainer. It is a huge hole. I would agree with. I know, and this is what really Patrick meant. I'm just giving him shit, really.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a huge hole in the performance space, and it is something for several years I have routinely said this is the next big area that the people will see big changes in performance with if they can learn to build it in there. So we can really fight over, cluster sets or whatever if you want, but really this is a spot where we have a big area to improve.
Mm-hmm.
So I would agree that a lot.
Now the breathing techniques that you're implementing with your athletes, and you're saying you have a different rhythm for, between rounds and pre-fight and, at home, all these different, are they athlete specific, or do you have kind of a general template that you use for every athlete and say, this is what we're going to use, and then you maybe adjust according to what works best for you?
Both. Really, really, really both. So in general, you have to understand, and this is basic program design stuff, okay? But you have to understand what's the point of that specific workout, what's the point of that week, and then what's the point of that phase or block or whatever we're in, right? Are we 4 weeks from competition? Are we 9 weeks from competition? The way that I like to talk about it is, are you optimizing or are you adapting? Are you trying to induce physiological adaptation, or are you trying to optimize and peak? is one way to think about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how to get to it, a couple of things. The big high-level stuff is typically post-exercise, and we've seen this a decent amount in the literature now. The folks that can get into parasympathetic post-workout faster tend to see greater physiological adaptations from the exact same training. So translation, you both do the same workout. Dave, you take the time to sit down and get parasympathetic really quickly. Chad, you don't. You run off, you grab coffee, you get back to work, etc. 6 weeks from now, you'll probably have a greater percent increase in performance from whatever marker we're looking at, Dave, than Chad would. Especially endurance adaptations. Now, strength and speed, we don't really know yet, but the endurance adaptations seem to be augmented pretty good by folks who can get parasympathetic really quickly post-exercise.
And how long? How long does that normally take to get into parasympathetic? And would you say?
Well, this is the point.
Mm-hmm.
So the ones that can get to it quickly have an advantage. The ones that take longer. So what are you looking at in terms of numbers? If you can get within a true parasympathetic state within 15 or so minutes. You're great. If it takes you an hour plus, or what typically happens is because of poor lifestyle, or that may not be fair, just a lack of understanding, is say Chad gets into parasympathetic naturally pretty quickly, but then he goes right back into a sympathetic activity, then that just pulls him right back out of it. Again, that's why I said he crushes coffee, he goes back into work, he does whatever, right? And he's back into boom, 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 and he's lit back up, he's in traffic, he's stimulated somehow, too much death metal, whatever the hell the case may be. So it's not necessarily the problem of you getting back in, but it's the fact that you never actually allowed yourself to come back down because of environmental concerns. So that is somewhat problematic. But again, it depends on what phase we're in. So I don't always necessarily want you to be driving adaptation all the time if I'm trying to cause a peak, because those things run antithetical to each other. You can't optimize at the same time you're trying to cause adaptation. These are counter approaches. So we have to understand that. And then, so we have broad things. Prior to a workout, we want to do the opposite, right? So we want to get you sympathetic. We want to get you up and going. And it depends on what type of workout. Is it an aerobic workout? Is it an anaerobic workout? Is it a technical workout? Are you an athlete? And this is where the specificity comes in. Are you an athlete who's too hyped up? And we need you to slow down a little bit and bring yourself back down. Then I'm not going to give you a huge sympathetic breathing protocol right before you're working out, because now I'm just driving the problem. Or are you the opposite? Do you need somebody who needs I'm tired of whatever, I'm not focused, I struggle to get going? Okay, then we want to get you up a little bit. And so we would typically look at this as an inverted U, right? And so if you're down here and you're not aroused enough, we need to enhance arousal. If you're over aroused, then we need to bring you back down to midnight. And so the concept is the exact same, but the actual approach with the technique we use could be totally different depending on the individual athlete, but we're typically trying to go to the same thing. Prior to bed, it's almost always the same. Like, we want to bring you, back down. So conceptually, again, going after the same thing, but there is an individual component. Where it gets even more complicated is we see routinely that the exact same prescription. So say I had you do box breathing, which is a typical, you imagine a box, there's 4 squares or 4 sides of the square, right? And so it would look something like this. Okay, inhale for 5 seconds, hold that for 5 seconds, exhale for 5 seconds, inhale for 5 seconds. Okay, so it's a 5-second even-sided box. Okay. Now, for some people, that may calm them down. Other people, that may arouse them. Some people, if you do 10-second box, a 3-second box. And so the prescription really changes depending on your ability to tolerate CO2, because that's what drives stress. That's what drives your desire to breathe. And there's a whole host. There's apnea breathing, cadence breathing. There's different sequences you can do. There's pranayama, there's breath of fire. There's all kinds of different things. And they generally have for example, breath of fire generally puts you in sympathetic. But some people, it doesn't do that too. Some people, it does the opposite. So we have categories of things, but we really, really do have to figure out what to do. Now, one thing we will use, as I just mentioned, is that CO2 tolerance test. And you can Google that a little bit. And that does a pretty good job of telling you which ratios to use based on where you're at. So if your CO2 tolerance is low, medium, or kind of high, and there's other ways you could do it too. I'm sure Patrick will talk about them. You can ask him about some of these things. And then you can ask him the specific ratios for different stuff if he's up on it, or if he's up for it. So what we typically do is we'll do that test on them. We'll do a couple of other little breathing tests, and then we'll say, okay, you scored here, so therefore we can basically plug you into the program, and now it'll have different ratios. But then within those ratios, you still have to try it. And what we'll spend a lot of time saying, okay, try this protocol, and at the end, tell me, do you feel more relaxed? Do you feel more anxiety? Do you feel less anxiety? Do you feel what? And then we'll adjust the numbers based on what they're saying. So right. The CO2 tolerance test works pretty damn well for the most part, but you do have to do a little bit of polish work after that.
That's fascinating. And I mean, I think we could just do a whole podcast just on that conversation. And I got to say, Andy, I'm incredibly impressed with the amount of areas that you seem to have a wide amount of knowledge in. I mean, how do you have the time? How do you have the time to be able to kind of get this in depth into so many different areas of expertise?
Well, I mean, this is what I do. You kind of joked about it at the very beginning, but when people ask what I do, I'm not niched intentionally. So I don't know the most about breathing stuff, but I know a little bit. I don't know the most about weight cut, but I know a lot about a lot of different areas. And so if you can imagine the classic cliche of a T, right? So there are people that I call problem identifiers, and there are solution providers. So I am a problem identifier. I'm pretty good, and I know the scientific literature in a lot of areas decently well, to be able to look at all things that go into human performance, your sleep cadence, your sleep patterns. I can read those things. We do comprehensive blood work, stool samples. I can go through all that stuff at a pretty high level, but I'm not the best at any of that. And so I can look through all, again, these aspects, your hydration stuff. What do you do in supplementation? What's your food timing look like? What are our performance measures? Let's do HRV. And I can really and what I try to do is identify, hey, this is the area where I see a huge hole. I don't know, I'm not the best in the world at that, but I do know who the guy or the girl is. Let's bring that person in. That person would do the vertical part of the T, and that's the solution provider. So sometimes when the problem's not that big a deal, I can provide the solution. And if it's not that difficult, but if it's like, oh boy, we need to rebuild the Lamborghini motor. I don't know that at all.
Right.
So let's bring in the world. Who's the best in the world at that? Oh, it's this guy. Okay, boom. It's this girl. Bring her on the team. That's our fix. And it just saves the athletes a lot of time because they're not going, God, I guess there's meditation, and then there's this like kin stretch stuff I should do, and then there's when they just end up doing 7,000 things, and they don't know where to focus their energy or the resources. And with a lot of the athletes I work with, it is a resource issue, right? So there's no, Chad, you mentioned, there's no money in weightlifting, right? There's no money in amateur wrestling. There's no money in most of these sports, right? And so I'm able to help them say, okay, this is the area where I know you got excited by hearing this and this on a podcast or whatever, but this is actually probably causing 80% of your problems. And let's invest in this area, and we'll get to the other stuff later. So it's triage, it's resource allocation, and it's helping them identify priorities that are all things under the performance umbrella, rather than just their programming or just their macros or whatever.
Yeah, you're kind of athlete strategist, right? You kind of give them the ability to kind of like strategize their training a little bit better. So I wish we had more time, Andy. I think we could go through quite a bit more. I had a bunch of other questions for you. Maybe we get you on for part 2, but I'm sure
I talk a lot, bro. I don't know if you know that. So.
No, it's awesome.
Whatever questions you had, cut in the 10th, and that's what you're going to get out of me.
Yeah, we probably talked a little bit too much about weightlifting in the beginning. Sorry.
I know. What was that all about?
No, I do have one more question before we kind of start wrapping it up, Dave, if you'd have time, Andy, if you don't mind.
So
yeah, and so it's with everything we've been talking about today, and I'm glad that you said that towards the end. You talked about triaging and helping people prioritize, and that's really what I'm getting at with this next question or topic that I'm covering. But we've been talking a lot about the differences in people being different, and you even said something earlier. Physiology is too unique, and I hear a lot of professionals say that a lot. And there's no problem, but what I know that people take that as, because I hear it all the time as a teacher and a coach in the community. And I'm just giving the example of being a weightlifting coach, and there's many different ways to look at it. But, they'll take that and say, okay, that means in general, when they hear that general statement, that my snatch needs to look completely different than this other person's snatch, for example. So where is the line between physiology is extremely unique and we're all different in so many ways, but also we're the same in so many ways as well, right? So and what I'm getting at for me is that when I look at 99% of the best in the world in weightlifting, and that's just a conservative estimation, it's more than that. They're doing at least a handful of things completely the same in their movement, and a number of other things in their training to be the best that they can be. And I know we have differences in muscle fibers and stuff like that, and we talked about those things. But for, let's say, the athlete with 75% slow twitch, but yet they have a passion for weightlifting and they want to be the best that they can, or this person that is really tall, so they think that they have to move completely different than this athlete that's really short. And so for me, I'm looking at these lifters that are lifting the most, and I want to mimic their movement with everything that I come across on at least a handful of areas. So my individualization is to give them individualized mobility drills, give them individualized technique drills, give them individualized cues to get them to move like this other human as much as possible. Yes, they may look different because their limb length proportions are different, right? But in the end, for me, if I look at what's similar instead of different, then all those differences are nothing other than a byproduct of them putting what those similarities are together. So where is that line for you?
Yeah. This is the fun of coaching, right?
Yeah.
This is the fun of being an athlete, is nobody knows.
Right.
Right? Like, are you really that special angel? Are you really that 0.4%? Everyone wants to think that, but you're probably not, right? The analogies here, if you've ever seen any of the research on sleep, it's pretty clear at this point that most of us need 8 or so hours of sleep, right? And there are a small subset of folks who can get away with 4 to 5. And everyone thinks they're that subset, when really it's like 4%, right? It's less than 4%. I think it's like less than 1% of people actually have the ability to function at their best, but everyone thinks they're that 1%. Not really the case, as you're alluding to, right?
Right.
The other saying that we hear that we'll say a lot is the methods are many, but the concepts are few. Right. So my mind's on baseball right now because my guys just got back to playing, right? And the season's about to start. We got like another 1 or 2 more preseason games, and then we're starting the season, right? So if you watch a baseball swing, everyone in the league has a different stance. But if you stop them mid-frame, right before they start to swing, they almost all look the exact same.
Right.
Exact same thing, right? And this is kind of what you're getting at. It's like, okay, great. There are some areas that you can play, but we all are humans. And biology is pretty similar from the gross estimate. So the point of research is not to be able to give individualized prescription, right? But it's to say, what's most likely to work the best in most people? And so it's probably behooves you to start with the things that work best most of the time in most people. From there, if you're having specific problems, you can try specific things, but don't start off doing the fringe thing. Don't start off doing something different, right? Start off with what has been tried and true. You're most likely, and again, this is statistically, you're most likely not the special case. You're not the first tall person ever to try to snatch. You're not the first, this, like millions of people have done it this way and thousands have been successful despite that. So my recommendation would be to start with those fundamentals and those basics and do those types of individualization that you get to. And of all the professional athletes world champions I've worked with, a huge percentage of it has been the very, very basics. Right? We'll do some of this advanced AI blood stuff and we'll do all that stuff, but that's only after typically months or years of starting with controlling hydration, sleep, you're like, that stuff. That's still, I'm telling you folks, like almost all the success I've ever had has been 90% plus with those things. And then eventually we get down to this really individualized, personalized level. So my approach is the same, right? Let's not roll out all the carpet. Let's not pull out all the tricks if all we really needed to do is get you to bed plus or minus within the same hour every night. That probably handles a good chunk of our problems. And it has. Like, it's been my experience, right? And the data will show the same thing. So it's still a tough line, though. This is why people hire me. This is why people hire you guys, right? Because they're like, I don't know when am I at that edge where I do need a little bit of personalization and individualization. But I mean, I know we're running out of time, but I mean, this is also the point of Brian and I's book a little bit is our opinion is that the actual individualized, personalized coaching is going to be right now it's sort of in the tank. It's not a great career, but I feel like it's going to be the booming career because people are going to be so tired of buying and following the the program here, they're going to want to be like, I want someone who's just paying attention to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so they know me and they can really go, okay, you're not special right now. We need to just do these foundations. Or, hey, this is where we need to break off. Well, you can't get that at the big mass appeal thing. So that's why I'm actually really optimistic about the future of individualized health, performance, whatever coaching you want to call it. I think it's going to be a very fruitful field down the line, and people are going to really like that. So,
yeah, I agree with that. And I think, with everything that's happened with Corona and all of us doing more online stuff, perhaps it's, the online individualized coaching that's going to be ready for the taking.
Yep. So, people want personalized attention. They're
sure.
going to want it even more.
Yep.
All right, Andy. Last few questions, very quick. Nothing too in depth here, but we like to finish our podcast off with a couple quick questions with our guests.
Careful, man. I can make any simple short question very long.
Well, I think I know the answer to this first one, and it's going to be a frustrating one. But what sport or discipline do you prefer, weightlifting or gymnastics?
Sorry, man.
Don't be sorry. Just speak your heart. Speak your heart.
Yeah. Well, weightlifting is pretty far ahead now.
Yeah. I would imagine so. But in the past, I've had a lot of weightlifters on here that have gone with gymnastics. Yes, so I'm still.
Andy, you like the underdog, right? I'm the underdog. I'm still way behind. I only have like five guests that have said weightlifting. So you can root for me from here on. I've got my rally cap on and all that stuff.
You guys got to interview better people.
I know. That's what I'm saying.
No, I think they're great guests. I think they're great
guests. The guests here. Yeah.
It's all Dave. It's a conspiracy.
I don't know. Even your weightlifting friends, a lot of them have picked gymnastics. So
I know. I feel like you slid some money.
Maybe they just don't like you. I think maybe it's just they have problems with you.
That's more likely than anything, right there. Absolutely.
I don't know if I keep calling those guys friends, Jack.
Hey, I can be an asshole. That's for sure.
Number 2. What do you prefer? Guests that you'd like to see on our podcast. Anybody that you've talked to, anybody that you've interviewed recently that has kind of hit on a topic or talked about something that you thought more people wanted to hear?
I will actually, as much as I love to give sports psychology a bunch of grief for not being real science, it's a big joke, right? One of my colleagues at Fullerton has coached so many national champions, world champions, Olympians. It's ridiculous. And he typically is very private, but I'm sure if I pulled enough strings, he would love to jump on. Because I hear a lot of people talking about sports psychology and they're super unqualified. And so getting somebody who's a real legit scientist as well as practitioner on would be, it doesn't matter the thing. He's worked with Olympians in weightlifting. He's worked with, I don't know if any gymnasts, but a ton. So that his name is Lenny Weir. I would bring him on. He's really understands psychology of excellence.
All right, fantastic. You got to pass along his info.
Well, gymnasts like Dave don't need sports psychology. They're just that good already, right?
Are you kidding me? I could have used a team of sports psychologists to get me through my career.
No, but Andy, I'm probably one of those people that shouldn't be talking about sports psychology, but I love it. I love to talk about sports psychology. I try to use it in my coaching and trick people into doing things and all that good stuff. So I would love to get an in-depth conversation with someone. So perhaps we can take you up on that offer. Last question. It's a little bit of a two-parter. The first part of it is what do you prefer? Reading a book, watching a movie, watching a documentary, a TV series, or one that I'll add that we haven't really asked is podcast. And of those that you pick, do you have a recommendation for a specific episode or book? Okay,
I don't watch normal TV stuff, so TV series are always out for me. I used to read books a lot. I don't do it a ton anymore. I feel like, and my book's even guilty of this, that basically after the title, you've figured out the point and the rest is sort of just filler. So I don't waste, those aren't a good use of time. I'm a big fan of podcasts in the whole area, and I could list a bunch if you'd like. But there's some downsides to that too. I like movies, but I have a just turned 2 and a 3-month-old.
Right.
So I have to watch like one movie in 3 years.
Yeah.
So those are out. I do actually I like learning things. So if I'm going to watch a documentary, I can't be topical. So, because they're all just so horrible. It has to be, and I hate murder, mystery, movie, crime things. Those are all out. So things that are, like a true story, educational thing. You're like, oh, did you know about the history of World War II or something? Then I'd be like, oh, dope. Let's watch that. But if it's going to be a documentary on like whatever, if I'm trying to learn things from, then I'm out on those things. So those would be my general answers. And in terms of, the podcast choices I have are of a similar thing. So there's a combination of just simple peak interest, as well as I really, really, really enjoy learning about things that are totally outside of my spectrum, things that I have no concept on. And I think this is one of the reasons why, Joe Rogan's show has gone just so massive, is because he'll have an astrophysicist on, then an economist on, and then he'll have a stupid fighter on, and he'll have all these things. And I think people enjoy hearing a wide range of topics. So those things. So my podcast playlist, if you will, would sort of represent that same thing. So it's all over the place. Of course, I'll watch and I'll still listen to some things that are really hardcore nutrition podcasts, or it's just like nutrition science or strength training stuff. But then I'll also, history stuff, just old things that are way off the cuff. I like to. So
awesome. And you're saying you have a 3-year-old, but you haven't watched the movie Frozen about 1 million times yet?
Well, I have a 2-year-old. She just turned 2.
I got you.
And she's still never seen TV or anything.
Okay. Yeah, be prepared. As soon as she turns 3, I have a 3-year-old, and I've watched Frozen in quarantine more times than I'd like to admit.
You can sing all the songs though, right? You can break them out right now if we wanted to.
It's actually, I'm forced to do it every day. So
nice.
Yeah.
Hey, you
need holding off on the TV thing for as long as possible, but it's coming. I'm sure.
Yeah, that's probably a good thing for sure. But I do want to see a video of Dave breaking it down. I would love that. We need that. That would go viral.
Yeah, I'm sure Sadie has it somewhere on her phone.
Although Dave is so good at everything, he'd probably perform it extremely well, and it would just be legit.
I only like to perform the things that I'm actually good at. How's that?
There you go. Well, he has beat me in weightlifting many times, believe it or not. So we won't get into that anymore. Man, Andy, it's been a pleasure. I've learned a ton. Really enjoyed the conversation. Do you have any parting words for the listeners? Anything you got coming up you want folks to know about?
Well, actually one thing that I'm just thinking of on the fly here is because of the Rona and all of us having to teach virtually, I've already been doing this in a small amount, but I'm really just going to dump a whole bunch. I basically take all of my university lectures and put them up for free.
Nice.
So you can basically take all of my classes and I put them up as what I call 5-minute, 25-minute, and 55-minute videos. So it's sports nutrition, performance training, some of the stuff. I don't make it even close to optimized for viewers or clicks or anything. I don't give a shit about any of that stuff. So if you're like, wow, I want to basically get a degree in exercise physiology or whatever, you can do that. So of course I think they're pretty entertaining and fun, but they're that. So those are all up. And then I got a whole summer class of sports nutrition that I'm about to upload. And then my 3 classes would be another sports nutrition class, a program design class for like senior grad level, and a senior grad level physiology of strength and conditioning. Not like your classic stupid XPhys class that doesn't actually cover strength there at all. But that'll all be up in just a bunch of different chunks. So that's all up, and I don't charge anything for anything, so it's all up there free.
And that's on your website, andygalpin.com?
Yep, all up there. Okay. YouTube. It's all the videos come up on YouTube and all that stuff. I try to post that on the socials when they come up, but it's all up on the YouTube. So there's already, I don't even know, 50 videos or something up total or more. So you'll plenty to keep you busy for now.
That's awesome. And my favorite so far, at least this was on Instagram. I'm not sure if you got it on YouTube as well, as Why We Fart So Much. So I haven't finished watching that one yet, but I'm definitely very intrigued by that. I got to check that out.
Well, I actually made a 55-minute version of that.
Oh, okay. So there you go.
It's done. It's up. I got to actually get it click to view. So yeah, by the time this comes up, who knows, it may be out there.
There you go. I got to watch that tonight instead of something on Netflix. But
yeah, stop watching those stupid ass documentaries.
Exactly. Maybe you should do a documentary on farting. Maybe that'll earn you some good income or something. I don't know, but
if you want to learn the basics of how to like get the least amount of likes and follows possible, I got you.
I don't need any help with that.
Perfect.
That's for sure. I'm so random. I'll get 50 likes on one post and 3,000 on another one. So I have no idea, and I don't like Instagram. I don't like social media, but I do like being able to put out information, and that's one way to do it. So Andy, like I said, I really appreciate it. And to the listeners out there, as always, we really appreciate you guys listening in. Hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to head over to PowerMonkeyFitness.com for services and upcoming events. Check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content. And yes, there is that Instagram that I was talking about, but Power Monkey Fitness at Dave Durante and at Ollie Chad. On behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your host. I'm Chad Vaughn with Dave Durante. And until next time, thank you all for listening.